Welcome to the Behavior Code. I'm Maria.
And I'm Gabriel. And today, okay, I'll just say it. We're talking about something that basically runs half of your life without you even realizing it.
Status. We are talking about status. And look, before you go, ugh, not another episode about success culture. This is not that. This is way more uncomfortable than that.
Yeah, because it's not about the people who are obviously chasing status, the guy at the party telling you about his yacht or whatever. It's about it's about all of us, including me, including you.
Including me, yes. Genuinely. I had to sit with some of this stuff while we were prepping for today, and I was like, okay, wow, that's me. That's absolutely me.
Right, right. So let me just kick it off with something that happened to me recently. I was at dinner with some friends and someone asked what I've been working on. And I immediately started framing my answer to make it sound more impressive than it actually is. And I didn't even consciously decide to do that. It just happened.
Oh, I do that all the time. It's like your brain just kind of auto selects the version of the story that makes you look good.
Exactly. And nobody's talking about that. Nobody's sitting around going, I wonder why I instinctively performed just then. But that's the whole show today. What's actually going on under the hood?
Okay, so let's actually paint a fuller picture because the status thing shows up in so many places that people don't clock. It's not just the guy with the Rolex, right? It's think about how people talk about where they went to school, even like 20 years later. Oh, yeah, I did my undergrad at, and then they name the school and they pause just long enough for you to register it.
The strategic pause. That's a real thing.
It's a very real thing. Or, the job title thing. Someone gets a promotion and suddenly they're correcting people. Actually, it's senior manager now. Like, okay, we get it.
And then there's social media, which is basically just a continuous status broadcast that we've all agreed to participate in and then pretend we don't care about.
The I don't really post much energy while posting 3 times a week.
Exactly. Or the people who post and then immediately say, ugh, I hate social media in the caption. Like you're on it right now. You're literally on it.
So, the question we really want to dig into today is why? Why are we like this? And the answer goes a lot deeper than just vanity or insecurity. There's a real biological story here.
There really is. And once you understand it, it makes you a little more compassionate toward yourself, actually, because it's not a character flaw, it's wiring.
It's wiring. Okay, let's get into it.
So here's the thing. Humans are intensely social animals, and for most of our evolutionary history, like hundreds of thousands of years, your rank within your tribe was literally life or death.
Literally, not metaphorically.
Not metaphorically, right. If you were low status in a tribe, you might not get enough food, you might not get a mate, you might get pushed to the periphery of the group, which made you much more vulnerable to predators. So your brain developed incredibly sophisticated machinery for tracking where you stood relative to other people.
And here's what's kind of wild. That machinery is still running today. The same neural circuits that your ancestors used to figure out who the alpha was in a group of hunters, those circuits are firing when you check how many likes your post got.
Which, when you put it like that, is both fascinating and slightly horrifying.
Slightly. There's actually a really interesting line of research on this. When people experience a gain in social status, like they get a promotion, they win something, someone publicly compliments them, you see activity in the brain's reward centers, the same areas that light up for food, for sex, for money.
So your brain literally treats status as a resource, a real physical resource that it craves and tracks.
Exactly. And on the flip side, when you feel like you've lost status, someone publicly embarrassed you, you got passed over for something, you feel like people are looking down on you, that activates the brain's threat response, the same system that would kick in if a predator walked into the room.
Which explains why public humiliation feels so viscerally awful, like disproportionately awful almost. You didn't get physically hurt, but your body's responding like you were.
Yeah, and there's research showing that social exclusion, like being left out of a group, being ostracized, activates the same pain pathways in the brain as physical pain, like the same regions. It's not a metaphor when people say rejection hurts. It actually hurts.
So we're not crazy, or, well, we are, but it's a very rational kind of crazy.
It's a very rational kind of crazy. And it gets more interesting. There are some researchers who argue that status anxiety, this low level hum of concern about where you stand, is one of the most powerful drivers of human behavior, period. More powerful than we consciously acknowledge.
Okay, say more about that, because I think people underestimate how much of their daily decision making is quietly influenced by status considerations.
Right. So think about where you choose to live. Like part of that decision might genuinely be about schools or commute time, sure. But there's usually also this layer of what does this neighborhood say about me? And most people won't say that out loud, but it's there.
Or the car you drive, or the brand of coffee you're carrying into a meeting, or honestly, the podcast you listen to. Like, oh yeah, I've been really into this niche behavioral science podcast. That's a status signal.
Are you saying our listeners are using us as a status signal?
I am absolutely saying that, and I think we should lean into it. Listen to the behavior code. It's a whole personality.
Okay. But no, that's actually the point. Status signals are embedded in everything, and they're often very, very subtle.
There's actually a concept I love for this. It's called conspicuous consumption, first described by Verblin back in like the 1890s. The idea that people consume goods not just for their utility, but to signal wealth and status. And he was writing about the Gilded Age, right? The literal robber barons with their mansions. But the principle applies today completely.
And I think it's actually gotten more sophisticated because now we're not just signaling with things we buy, we're signaling with how we spend our time, what we know, what we care about. Like, I don't own a TV is a status signal. I've been off social media for 2 years is a status signal.
Being busy is a status signal.
Oh, we are absolutely getting to busyness. That one's a whole thing.
Okay, so let's talk about how status shows up in modern life because it has evolved in some pretty fascinating ways. Like the signals have changed, even if the underlying need hasn't.
Yeah, so in more traditional or earlier societies, status was pretty tied to things like physical strength, age, lineage, like who your family was. And those things are still relevant in some contexts, but in modern Western life especially, the game has shifted towards credentials.
Credentials, yes. And this is interesting to me because credentials are supposed to be about competence, right? A degree is supposed to mean you know things. But there's a whole layer of status performance that gets baked into it.
Totally. I mean, the fact that people put their university on their LinkedIn, even if it was 20 years ago and completely unrelated to their current work, that's not about demonstrating competence. That's a status signal.
Or the people who go back and get an MBA, not necessarily because they need the skills, but because it comes with a certain social stamp. And I'm not saying that's bad. I think it's just honest to acknowledge what's actually driving the decision.
And then there's the whole follower count thing. Social media has created this very public, very quantified status hierarchy that didn't exist before. You can now numerically rank yourself against other people. It's kind of it's kind of brutal when you think about it.
It's extremely brutal. And it's interesting because in most pre-digital social groups, you had a pretty clear sense of your rank within maybe 100, 150 people. Like Dunbar's number, the idea that humans are really built to track relationships in groups of that size. But now you can compare yourself to millions of people simultaneously.
Which is kind of a recipe for misery, because there will always, always be someone with more followers, more likes, more whatever.
Always. And the research on social comparison is pretty grim in that regard. When people compare upward, comparing themselves to people who are doing better, it tends to decrease well-being and increase anxiety. And social media is essentially a comparison engine that runs upward comparisons constantly.
There's also this interesting thing that happens with neighborhoods and where you live. There's research showing that people's sense of their own income, like how wealthy they feel, is relative to their immediate neighbors, not to some objective standard. So you can be objectively quite wealthy, but if you live next to people who are wealthier, you might still feel financially inadequate.
The keeping up with the Joneses thing is real.
It is so real, and it's not irrational. It's your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is track relative position.
Okay, here's one that I find kind of fascinating. Job titles. Like the proliferation of fancy job titles in recent years. Chief Happiness Officer, Director of First Impressions, Growth Ninja.
Growth Ninja. I've seen that one.
There's a whole research area showing that when people get more impressive sounding titles, even without a pay rise, their job satisfaction goes up because the title is a status signal to themselves and to others.
Right, and I think this speaks to something really important about status, which is that it's not purely about external recognition. It also shapes how we see ourselves. Like, you get the title and you start carrying yourself a little differently. The internal story changes.
Yeah, and there are also these subtler status games that happen in professional settings that people engage in without really naming them, like the meeting status game.
Oh, tell me.
Okay, so there's the person who arrives last to the meeting and makes no apology for it, because showing up exactly on time or slightly late signals that your time is valuable. And then there's the person who references things that other people in the room don't know about, dropping names or inside references just to establish that they have access to information others don't.
Or speaking the least in a meeting. There's actually status in being the person who barely says anything, and then when you do speak, everyone goes quiet. Like, that's a power move.
That's a huge power move, the silence game, underrated.
And I think one of the most subtle modern status games is what you choose not to engage with. Like not watching certain shows, not listening to certain music, not being on certain platforms. That can all be framed as a kind of elevated taste. I'm above that.
Cultural status, yeah. The whole highbrow, lowbrow thing is just a status hierarchy dressed up as aesthetic preference.
Exactly. You know, Bourdieu wrote extensively about this, the idea of cultural capital, that taste itself is a form of status currency. And the rules are always set by whoever currently holds the status. So what counts as good taste shifts over time.
And it's self-reinforcing, because if you are raised with access to classical music, international travel, a certain kind of education, you have the cultural capital that certain high-status communities value. And people who didn't have that access get marked as somehow less refined, which is really just a status hierarchy masquerading as objective quality.
Yep. Okay, I think we need to talk about the hidden stuff, because this is where it gets really juicy.
Okay, yes, this is the section where we hold up the mirror and things get a little uncomfortable.
So let's start with interrupting, because this is a behavior that's really clearly status linked and most people don't realize it. Research on conversational dynamics shows that people who interrupt more tend to be higher in the social hierarchy of a group. And interrupting is often a way of asserting that your thoughts have more value than the person currently speaking.
And there's gendered research here too. Studies consistently show that men interrupt women at higher rates than the reverse, which maps onto broader social status dynamics. And people who get interrupted often don't push back, even when they want to, because doing so risks a confrontation that might cost them socially.
Right. So even something as mundane as who finishes whose sentence in a meeting it's a status negotiation happening in real time.
Name dropping is another big one, and I'll just confess, I have definitely done this. You mentioned knowing someone impressive or having been somewhere exclusive or having access to something other people don't, and ostensibly you might be making a relevant point, but there's this other function happening, which is I want you to know that I have relationships and access that confer status on me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because name dropping is kind of universally mocked, but people still do it all the time, which tells you something about how powerful the drive is. Like, you know it's going to be perceived as a little cringe, and you do it anyway.
Because the status reward in the moment outweighs the social cost, or at least your brain thinks it does.
Now, envy. This one is interesting because it's one of the most powerful and most denied emotions. People will admit to jealousy sometimes, but genuine envy, like the kind where you actually want someone else to have less, that's really hard to own.
Because it makes you look bad. Saying I'm envious implies you're not enough, though people dress it up as criticism. I just don't think they deserved it. It was really all just connections. They got lucky. When really the feeling is, I want what they have and I'm upset that they have it and I don't.
And here's the behavioral science part. Envy is a very useful signal if you can read it right. Research suggests that the things we envy tend to cluster around domains that we care about and that we're invested in. So if you feel a pang when a colleague gets published, that probably tells you something about your own ambitions.
That's actually a really useful reframe. Instead of, why am I being petty about this? You ask, okay, what is this feeling pointing at?
Exactly. Envy as data rather than envy as a character flaw. Now, okay, we have to talk about performative busyness because I think this might be the most perfectly modern status signal.
I am so glad we're getting to this.
So, historically, like in aristocratic societies, leisure was the status signal. Being able to not work was proof that you had resources and people working for you. That's why the old money types would look down on people who were visibly hustling.
Right, the landed gentry don't have a LinkedIn profile saying, grinding every day.
No. But in our current culture, and particularly in professional and tech circles, that has completely flipped. Busyness has become the status signal. How are you? Crazy busy, honestly, just swamped. That's not a complaint, that's a brag. That's saying, I'm important, I'm in demand, my time is valuable.
And it's everywhere. The people who respond to every email with a two-sentence response at 11 p.m. The people who mention how little sleep they got as if it's a badge of honor. The whole hustle culture thing is largely a status performance.
And the thing is, and this is really important, being genuinely productive doesn't require you to be visibly busy. The performance of busyness and the actual output are often disconnected.
Completely disconnected. In fact, there's some evidence that the people who are most visibly performing busyness are sometimes using it as a signal precisely because the output isn't there. Like, if you can point to the hours, you don't have to point to the results.
Oof, that's a little rough.
A little rough, also true.
Also true, yeah. And then there's the anti-busyness status signal, which is the person who's like, oh, I've really been intentional about protecting my time, or I work 4-hour days. That's now also a status signal of being so productive, so optimized, so above the grind that you don't even need to be busy.
You can't win. Status is everywhere. There is no exit.
There is no exit, but there might be an escape hatch, and we'll get to that. But first, relationships.
Oh, this is a rich one, because we like to think that our relationships, especially our romantic ones, are purely about love and connection, and they are about those things. But status is deeply woven into how we form and maintain relationships. And the research here is actually kind of fascinating.
Let's start with dating, because this is where the evolutionary stuff gets really visible. There's a huge body of research on mate selection, evolutionary psychology, behavioral economics, and consistently across cultures, status and status indicators are major factors in who people find attractive.
And interestingly, in a lot of this research, women weight status signals, things like resource acquisition, ambition, social standing, more heavily than men do on average. And men, on average, weight physical attractiveness, which is itself a kind of status signal of genetic fitness, more heavily. Although this varies a lot and is getting more nuance as gender roles evolve.
Right, and I want to be careful here because the evolutionary framing can make this sound very deterministic. Like, women are just looking for a provider, men are just looking for youth and beauty. And that's a very reductive reading. The actual research is more subtle.
Much more subtle. But the core point stands. Status is part of the attraction calculus. And people aren't often honest about this, even with themselves. You'll hear people say, I just want someone kind and funny. But then their dating patterns tell a different story.
Or they'll feel inexplicably more attracted to someone after learning they went to a particular school or have a certain job. And they'll rationalize it as, well, that tells me something about their drive, which, fair, sometimes it does. But part of it is just the status signal is doing work.
There's also this fascinating dynamic with what researchers call status matching in relationships. The idea that people tend to end up with partners of roughly equivalent social status. And this plays out across income, education, attractiveness, social network quality, like seeks like in status terms.
Which has some interesting implications because it means that big status gaps, one partner being much higher or lower status, can create real tension. There's research showing that in couples where there's a large income gap, The lower earning partner often experiences feelings of inadequacy or resentment, even if both people consciously say they're fine with it.
Because the status system is running underneath the conscious narrative.
Exactly. Okay, friendships, because I think people assume friendship is status neutral. Like we choose our friends based on genuine affinity. And that's true, but status plays a role there too.
Yeah, there's research on this. People tend to befriend others of similar or slightly higher status. The slightly higher part is interesting. Having high status friends confers status on you. So there's often an underlying logic to why certain people seek each other out.
And think about how status affects who gets included in social groups and who doesn't. Like the social dynamics of friend groups often mirror workplace hierarchies more than people like to admit. There's usually someone who sets the tone, someone whose opinion has more weight, someone who people slightly defer to.
And getting excluded from a group, even a social group, even as an adult, triggers that deep threat response we talked about earlier. It's not just being left off an invite list. It's an actual signal to your nervous system that your rank has dropped, that you might be losing your place.
Which is why social exclusion hurts as much as it does. Adults feel this acutely and often feel embarrassed about how much it affects them. Like, I'm a grown up, why do I care that I wasn't invited to this thing? But you care because your brain is wired to care.
And marriage, this is interesting too. Marriage has historically been a major status transaction. Like, who you marry says a great deal about your social standing in both directions. And we've moved away from arranged marriages in most Western contexts, but the status dynamics haven't disappeared. They've just become more implicit.
Right, and the neighborhoods you choose to live in, the schools you send your kids to, the social circles you cultivate after having kids, these are all status decisions that happen under the guise of other, more palatable justifications. We just wanted good schools, we just wanted a safe neighborhood. And those things are real, but so is the status layer.
I think one of the most honest things you can do is just acknowledge that both things are true simultaneously. You can want genuinely good things for your family and be aware that your choices are also shaped by status considerations. Those aren't mutually exclusive.
Yep, both and, not either or. Okay, so if all of this is true, if status is this deeply embedded, running all these hidden programs in our behavior, what do we do about it?
Okay, so I want to be really honest here and say that you don't escape it completely. Like anyone selling you a how to transcend status anxiety forever framework is overselling.
Hard agree. The goal isn't to become some enlightened being who floats above all social comparison, because that wiring is in you. It's not going anywhere. But there is a meaningful difference between being unconsciously driven by status anxiety and being a person who's aware of it, can name it, and can make more deliberate choices.
Awareness is genuinely the first step, and it's not trivial. Just being able to notice, oh, I just did a status move there. I just name dropped. I just performed busyness. I just felt that pang of envy. That noticing creates a little gap between the impulse and the action.
And I think one of the most powerful things you can do is shift from external metrics to internal metrics. Like, what does success actually look like to you, stripped of how other people perceive it? That's a question most people have genuinely never sat with.
Right, because we absorb metrics from our environment constantly. Successful people have X, good parents do Y. People of this age should have Z, and we just kind of inherit these benchmarks and then spend enormous amounts of energy chasing them without ever asking, do I actually want this?
There's a concept in self-determination theory, this is a well-supported framework in psychology, that distinguishes between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic is doing something because it's genuinely meaningful or interesting to you. Extrinsic is doing it for the reward, the recognition, the status signal. And research consistently shows that when your motivation shifts too far toward extrinsic, you do things for status, for validation, it actually undermines your sense of well-being and even your performance over time.
Which makes intuitive sense, right? If you're a writer and you're writing because you love writing, that's sustainable. If you're writing to prove something to people who doubted you, that can work as fuel for a while, but it burns out, and the satisfaction is always conditional. It depends on the external recognition showing up the way you need it to.
Exactly. And the external recognition almost never fully satisfies because the brain habituates to status gains. You get the promotion and the dopamine hit is real, but then it fades, and now this is just your new normal, and you're already scanning for the next level. It's a treadmill.
The hedonic treadmill applied to status.
Exactly that. So, one thing that actually helps, and there's good research on this, is investing in what I'd call competence based identity, defining yourself by what you can do and how you grow, rather than by how you're perceived. Because competence is something that actually compounds over time, and it's not dependent on other people recognizing it.
And it's more resilient. Like, if your identity is built around your job title and you lose the job, you've lost a piece of who you are. But if your identity is built around your capacity to think clearly or build things or connect with people, those things don't get taken away.
Autonomy is another big one. Research in self determination theory shows that people who feel a strong sense of autonomy, like they're genuinely choosing their path rather than being driven by social expectations, have better mental health outcomes, more intrinsic motivation, higher life satisfaction.
And that makes sense because if you're chasing someone else's version of status, you're, by definition, not living your own life. You're living a life designed to impress an audience that probably isn't paying as much attention as you think.
There's actually a study, I believe it was looking at deathbed regrets in palliative care, and one of the most common regrets people expressed was, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. That one hits every time I think about it.
Because at the end, nobody's keeping score. Like, nobody's going to show up at your deathbed and hand you a trophy for all the status games you won. But you will remember whether you actually lived.
Yeah, and I think another practical piece of this is be really intentional with your comparison community. If you're constantly in environments where the currency is money or followers or prestige, that's going to drive your behavior, whether you want it to or not, because your brain is constantly calibrating against reference points. So you have some power to choose what those reference points are.
Intentionally curate your inputs, your social feeds, your peer group, the conversations you have, because those are the frames through which you interpret your own standing.
And maybe the most subversive thing of all, which I genuinely believe, is deciding that your values are your status markers. Like, am I being the kind of person I want to be? Am I showing up for the people I care about? Am I doing work that actually matters to me? Those become the scoreboard, and that scoreboard is entirely within your control.
That's the move. It's not easy because the external signals are loud. But it is possible to build a life where you're mostly playing by your own rules. And I think that's what most people actually want underneath all this status game.
Underneath all of it, yeah. Okay, let's bring this home.
Okay, so before we wrap up, we want to give you something to actually do with all of this. Because information without application is just interesting trivia.
So here's the challenge we want to leave you with this week. Just notice. That's it. For 1 week, become a student of your own status behaviors. When you catch yourself dressing up a story to sound more impressive, just notice that. When you feel that little sting of envy, get curious about it. When you perform busyness, notice it.
And notice the moments when you make a decision about what to buy, where to go, what to post, what to say. And ask yourself honestly, is this actually what I want, or is this a status performance?
You don't have to change anything, not yet. Just build the awareness muscle first, because awareness is where all of the interesting work starts.
And I think you'll be surprised, because once you start looking, you'll see it everywhere, in yourself, in the people around you, in the media you consume. The status game is running in the background of almost everything.
But here's the hopeful part. You're not just a passive player in that game. You have more agency than you think. And the first step toward using that agency is just seeing clearly.
Beautifully put.
Thank you. Okay, that is a wrap on today's episode of The Behavior Code. If this episode made you think, made you a little uncomfortable, or made you catch yourself doing a status move this week, that's exactly what we're going for.
Share it with someone who you think would appreciate it, or someone who really needs to hear it.
We'll leave that to your discretion.
You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, and if you want to go deeper on any of this, the research, the frameworks, all of it, we'll have some links and notes in the show description.
Until next time, I'm Gabriel.
I'm Maria. Thanks for listening.
Take care of yourselves.